previous lesson. Hello, welcome today to our science lesson, the topic nervous system. In our previous lesson, we were able to explore a little bit of nervous system. We said that the body is made up of different tissues, organs, and organ systems. All of these are supposed to be coordinated so that they can be able to satisfy the demand of cells. Because of this, then nervous system is very important. We also pointed out that, for instance, when we were looking at lymphatic system, we were able to note some of the systems that work together with lymphatic system. One of them was digestive system, we had circulatory system, and immune system. Therefore, nervous system is important so that all of the systems that are found in the body can be coordinated and can allow communication between each system so that they can effectively serve the body. That's why we looked at the nervous system. And then we are able to look at the component of the nervous system. We said the basic structural, functional unit of the nervous system are the nerve cells. Nerve cells. So these nerve cells will usually come together to form tissues, which will later come together to form organs like the brain and the spinal cord. Therefore, in essence, nervous system is divided into two major parts. If we may use a chart or a flow chart to show that, nervous system is made up of two major parts. We have the central nervous system. Central nervous system. And peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system also is made up of two major parts. We have the brains and then the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is further divided into two. We have voluntary nervous system. And involuntary nervous system. So in brief, voluntary nervous system usually consists of cells or nerves that are controlled through thought. There's some thought process that is involved. For example, for you to move from one point to another, you will decide for you to move. And during that movement, there is contraction of muscles. So that contraction of muscles, it has been a thought process from the brain that now has decided, or now that you have decided to move. So muscular contraction. Muscular contraction. So this one can bring about, for example, raising up of your hand, nodding of your head, e.g. nodding. You decide to nod. And then involuntary nervous system, this one includes systems where there is no thought process. And the process happens without your control. For instance, we were able to mention previously when we were looking at types of neuron that you, for instance, breathing process. Breathing process is an involuntary process controlled by involuntary nervous system. Vomiting, we mentioned this earlier on. Vomiting is an involuntary process. For instance, when you have fever or you are suffering from a disease and one of the symptoms is vomiting, like cholera, you cannot stop vomiting, or you cannot prevent the vomiting from coming out unless you are given some medicine or some drugs. So there are several processes, but I want us to concentrate here first before we move to peripheral nervous system in a later stage. So we have said central nervous system is made up of brains and spinal cord. So I want us to look at the brains. The brains. Now you know where brains are located in the human body. Brains are usually found enclosed in a bony case. This case is called the cranium. The cranium is also referred to as skull. So the skull or cranium usually encloses the brains. But remember, this is a bony tissue or bone tissue. Now, being a bone, one characteristic of a bone is that it is hard. And because it's hard, the surface of the bone can easily damage the brain cells. So because of that, if that is the casing, under this cranium, there is a membrane underlying the cranium, and then another membrane overlying the brains. If this is the brain, we shall have two membranes, this one and that one. And the outer part, the casing, which is bony, is the cranium. So the role of cranium or skull for the head or for purpose of the brain is protection, offers protection to the brains, especially from mechanical damage. Sometimes you'll hit your head, maybe through a fall on a hard surface, but the brains are not going to be damaged because it is hard. But we have said, because the brains are delicate, we need other material to cushion it. So we have two types of membrane called meninges. So in between these meninges is a space. We have a space. The space is called cerebrospinal space. Cerebrospinal space. That cerebrospinal space is filled with a fluid. The fluid is called cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. So we are saying we have a casing, harder part, offering protection. Also some membranes. Those membranes are called meninges. Those membranes are called meninges. But in between the membranes are space, and that space is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. So that fluid has some roles of cerebrospinal fluid. Can also be abbreviated as CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. So one role of cerebrospinal fluid, we can derive it from the composition of cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid contains nutrients. Some of the nutrients include glucose, amino acids. We have mineral ions. Water is inclusive. So because it has nutrients, because of the presence of nutrients in CSF, it means the nutrients, they'll be involved in nourishing of the brains. So the role of CSF is providing nourishment to brain cells, together even with other materials like oxygen. Apart from nutrients, we also have oxygen. So all of them will be used by the brain cells. It has been established that brain cells are one of those cells that are always working. And because of that, they use a lot of materials. Those materials has to be replenished from time to time. They'll be replenished from the cerebrospinal fluid. Remember, brain cells, just like any other cell, requires glucose together with oxygen so that they can obtain energy through the process of respiration, which is very important. Another role of cerebrospinal fluid, we have said this now, nourishment of brain cells or to brain cells. But as they are nourished, the brain cells are going to use these materials in its metabolism. As it metabolizes, it releases waste metabolic products, like, for instance, carbon 4 oxide or ammonia from breakdown of the amino acids. So because of that, those waste metabolic products are supposed to be eliminated from the brain cells. How will they be eliminated from brain cells? They will be eliminated from brain cells through diffusion through the meninges, and then it will settle in the cerebrospinal fluid. So we can see there is exchange of nutrients into brain cells and metabolic waste product from brains into cerebrospinal fluid. So in essence, another role of CSF is providing a medium for exchange of metabolic waste, provides site for exchange of metabolic products, waste metabolic products between brain cells and blood, because after these materials are settling here, they will now move into blood capillaries. Another role of CSF is providing cushioning of the brains from mechanical damage. Now, sometimes, in fact, very many times, especially for children, because they are playful enough, they'll fall down even with their heads, they'll run, they'll jump up, but the brains, most of the time, they are not damaged, unless it is a very serious knock. Why is it that even with those knocks or hits on the head, there is no damage to the brain? It's because of cerebrospinal fluid that cushions the brain. In other words, cerebrospinal fluid acts as a shock absorber against mechanical damage. So the head, even for the soccer players, for instance, they'll hit the ball with their head and the brains are not going to be damaged even a little bit, because the CSF is cushioning the brains from any damage. So what is the role of the brains? Role of the brains. Now, just like a nervous system, we have said brains are part of nervous system. So because they are part of nervous system, then they perform the role of the nervous system. Previously, we mentioned the role of the nervous system. We said body is made up of several organs, tissues, and systems, but they need to work together so that the demands of the cells are satisfied or are achieved. So the brain comes in handy because it is the one that coordinates all activities of the body so that the satisfaction of the cells is arrived at. So it coordinates all activities of the body. Why this coordination? So that there is effective communication. There is effective communication amongst body systems. Among body systems, so as the cells are well served. Excretion, blood circulation, immune system, lymphatic system, so many of the systems that we have mentioned are going to work together effectively because of the coordination which arises from the brains. So another question that we should ask ourselves, how does brain work? How does the brains work? How do the brains work? Does it just work independently from the body and decides to coordinate or control body activities? No, it starts from somewhere. We were able to go through the neurons. We said we have sensory neuron, we have intermediate neuron, connector neuron, and then we have the motor neuron. So those neurons, the nerve cells, are very important for the brains to function. Without them, the brains are not going to work well. So for the brains to work, we must have a stimuli. A stimuli. It starts with a stimuli. What is a stimuli? A stimuli is change in the external environment, either internal or external environment. change in the environment. For instance, a change in environment, you are feeling pain because you have stepped on a sharp object. So because that's a stimuli, for instance, if it is you are walking and then you step on a sharp object, or you touch on a hot object, that is a stimuli, a nerve impulse will be generated. When a nerve impulse is generated, but it will be generated by sensory receptors, sensory cells, not sensory receptors. Nerve impulse is generated by the stimuli, and then, or due to presence of stimuli, and then it is received. That nerve impulse is received by sensory receptors. Remember, sensory receptors are found in sense organs. So all of these sensory cells, sensory receptors are found in the sense organs. Then a sensory neuron will pick up the nerve impulse through sensory neuron. Sensory neuron picks up the nerve impulse and transmits that nerve impulse to the central nervous system. And the central nervous system here being the brains. So in the brains, or in the central nervous system, we have intermediate neurons. We were able to point out that intermediate neurons, they lack myelin sheath. Because they lack myelin sheath, it will allow that nerve impulse to get into central nervous system, or the brain. The brain now will take on by interprets the impulse, interprets the nerve impulse, or sometimes we shall say interprets the sensory response. After interpretation, now there will be another impulse from central nervous system through motor neuron. So it flows through motor neuron. So motor neuron will now again conduct or transmit the nerve impulse. That nerve impulse flowing through the motor neuron is called a motor response. And then motor neuron terminates into effector organs. The effector organ, if it's a muscle, is going to either relax or contract appropriately to remove the body from danger. Remember, we cited an example of stepping on hot objects. So by that, the brain will have been involved in the nervous system, or in coordination of all this. So the most important part is here, where the brain is interpreting and then releases a response that will be conducted through motor neuron to effector organs, in this case the muscle or a gland, and then the body responds appropriately so that the body is removed from danger. Parts of the brain. Now for you to get the parts very easily, I'll use a sketch and then we label together parts of the brain of we shall use man, of man. So we have this part I'm using a sketch just to show So for man, the largest part of the brain is cerebrum. And then the hind part of the head, we find another part of the brain called cerebellum. Then this one is called medulla. This part is called medulla oblongata. You can also just refer to it as medulla. We have other smaller parts of the brain. We have called this part called thalamus. Thalamus. And we have another part that's just below thalamus. Because it's below, we call it hypo. Anything that's lower is hypo. Hypo. So we add the stem word or the keyword thalamus. So it will be called hypothalamus. Closely associated with another part called pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. And then toward the posterior end of the brain, there is an extension of a structure that forms the spinal cord. Spinal cord. So these are the major parts of the brain. We want to find out the role of each part. I'll use the same parts. Cerebrum. We have said that cerebrum is the largest part of the brain in man. So it is the one that defines man from other animals. Most of the animals have smaller cerebrum as part of the brain. So because of the differences in sizes, it makes man to be a more superior human or animal than the rest of other vertebrates. So what are some of the functions associated with cerebrum? Right now you have engaged your cerebrum for this purpose, learning. So any type of learning usually takes place in this part of the brain called cerebrum. Other functions include, as you learn, sometimes whatever you have learned you'll forget, but we have a percentage that remains in your brain. Where does it remain? It remains in cerebrum. Therefore, cerebrum is concerned with memory. Memory. For you to remember facts, concepts, it will require the role of cerebrum. We have others like learning of language. For you to learn a language, you'll engage, or the part that will be engaged is cerebrum. Language comes with speech. We have other processes associated with the cerebrum like judgment. Judgment. You want to judge a distance or depth. Sometimes when you are walking or you want to throw a vault, you'll judge your distance where it can fall. or your depth, so that you can either jump if it is safe for you or not jump because it is going to be dangerous for you. Judgment, personality, thinking, several other processes that are concerned with learning. Then we have cerebellum. Now, during this process of learning, maybe you are taking notes. For you to take notes, this part of the brain is going to be involved. Yes, you are learning, but for you to write, coordination of the muscles in your hand and in your fingers, there must be coordination. For those muscles to be coordinated, for you to write even the word cerebellum, it is the cerebellum itself that will be involved. Coordination, involved in coordination of muscles. Coordination of muscles. You want to either increase your speed of walking, strides that is, you'll have to coordinate the muscles. Cerebellum is going to be involved. You want to jump over, maybe over a hurdle. Muscles should be coordinated for you to be involved. So involved in coordination of muscles. Another important role of cerebellum is balance and posture. Involved in balance and posture. You have seen acrobatics doing very many things with their bodies. Or even you want to stand on one leg. You want to do something. For you to balance, even on stairs. For you to balance on that stair, it is the cerebellum that's going to help you do that. So you realize that this part of the brain in animals that are involved in jumping into the air, for example, the arboreal kind of movement. For example, the apes, they have a slightly higher capacity of cerebellum than in man, so that it can easily balance itself in air, and also for moving from one tree to another, catching on branches. We have medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is involved in controlling involuntary activities. Controls involuntary activities. We have mentioned involuntary activities somewhere. Activities that take place in your body and you have no control over them. Like breathing. Breathing takes place whether you are controlling it or not. E.g. breathing. Breathing movement. We have respiration. You cannot decide that you want to stop respiration in your body unless you do other manipulation on your body, like stopping flow of oxygen into the lungs, or strangling somebody or yourself, something like that. That's when you can easily stop respiration. The factors that support respiration. Swallowing. Remember, we talked about swallowing in digestive system. We said swallowing, for somebody to swallow or for you to swallow, there'll be some peristaltic movements. Those peristaltic movements are controlled by medulla oblongata. So you cannot say that you have swallowed your food halfway, the throat, and then you stop it. It is not possible because it is an involuntary activity, involuntary action. You have no control over it. So there are several, even digestion. Once food reaches into the digestive system, it will be broken down, especially if it is digestible, whether you like it or not. So you cannot eat today and then now you decide, I want this food to remain in my stomach for several days. Your decision, it's not possible. It is an involuntary action controlled by medulla oblongata. We have thalamus. Thalamus, part of the brain, is small, but it is involved in controls pain and pleasure. Controls pain and pleasure. When you hurt yourself, you will feel pain because this part of the brain is stimulated. Indeed, it is true that sensory cells or sensory neuron have conducted or transmitted the nerve impulse to the CNS, but the specific CNS part is thalamus. That's why you are feeling pain. Sometimes you'll take drugs to relieve that pain. So that drug usually acts on thalamus. Pleasure controls receptors for pleasure. You maybe want to go holiday to feel good. You want to swim to feel good. You want to go and watch a movie to feel good. The part of the brain that is enabling you feel good is the part called thalamus. We have hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is just found below the thalamus. This part mainly is involved in controlling homeostatic functions. Homeostatic functions. Homeostatic comes from the word homeostasis. Homeostasis is maintenance of a constant internal environment. Internal environment could come in different ways. For example, in form of temperature. Temperature in the body is supposed to remain around 36.8 degrees Celsius or approximately 37 degrees Celsius. It is the role of hypothalamus to do that. Homeostatic functions. I'll label that later. So, e.g., so that process of maintaining a constant temperature in our body, internal temperature, is called thermoregulation. So the body is involved, or hypothalamus is involved in thermoregulation. Body fluids must also be maintained constantly. When you take in a lot, you urinate a lot so that we have a constant amount. When you don't take in more fluids, you'll feel thirsty so that you top up your blood volume. That process is called osmo regulation. Osmo regulation. Remember, we also said that blood is made up of solids. These solids are not supposed to be too much or too low. That ability of controlling the salts so that they are constant in our body, we call it ionic regulation. So all homeostatic functions are controlled by hypothalamus. Another role of hypothalamus is controlling or has receptors for appetite. For appetite, for you to eat, you need appetite. Thirst. We have even feeling hungry, hunger. They are contained in hypothalamus. Another role of hypothalamus is the one that controls activity of this part of the brain, the pituitary gland. Controls pituitary gland. Controls pituitary gland. Then the last portion is pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is also referred to as a master gland. Why is it called a master gland? We have several other glands in our bodies. You are able to mention, for example, mammary glands. We have adrenaline glands. Mammary gland secretes milk. Adrenal gland secretes adrenaline. We have thymus gland. We were able to find out their role. The one that converts lymphocytes into specialized T cells for immunity. There are several in our bodies. So for them to function, they are going to receive responses or receive commands from the pituitary gland. That's why it's called a master gland. Therefore, in essence, pituitary gland controls secretion or controls secretion of hormones by all other glands. Controls secretion of hormones by other glands, all other glands. Other glands must respond to the order or to whatever pituitary gland has responded to. So it is the one that controlling all other glands. So these are the major parts of the brain. But the brain does not work alone because it's the central nervous system. It has also another part called the spinal cord. Spinal cord. So we have said spinal cord is just part of the brain. It's the posterior extension of the brain. Posterior extension of the brain, but through central canal of the vertebral column. Vertebral column is made up of a series of short bones called vertebrae. So each of these bones has a hole. That hole is the central canal. So when you have so many of the bones coming together to form a column, we shall have a continuous column or a continuous space where the spinal cord will be enclosed. If you do a cross section of the spinal cord, it is enclosed with membranes. Those membranes are called meninges, just like that one, or meninges, just like that one of the brain. And then inside this, we have a slightly H-shaped structure, a H-shaped structure called gray matter. And then outside is another structure called the white matter. White matter. So this one is called gray matter because it contains cell bodies and dendrites of intermediate neurons. Intermediate motor, and sensory neurons. So the cell bodies and dendrites. Remember, cell body of motor neuron is in the central nervous system. Dendrites of the sensory neuron is also in the central nervous system. Dendrites of intermediate neurons are in the central nervous system. So because the cell bodies of motor neuron and intermediate neuron, together with the dendrites of these two, sensory neuron and intermediate neuron, are found in the gray matter, it gives it this color, gray in color. So this one forms the major part for interpretation of nerve impulses. Then white matter, the outer part. This part, if that was the cell body of the motor neuron, we shall have myelin sheath outside. Myelin sheath outside. If that was the sensory neuron, dendrites are there. We have myelin sheath in this region, the white matter or the white matter region. So we have said the axon here is covered by a layer called myelin sheath. This was in our previous lesson. Myelin sheath has a layer of fats. Fats are usually white, in this case white in color. That's why this region is called the white matter. This one gray matter because it contains cell bodies and dendrites of intermediate motor and sensory neuron. White matter because it contains axon of motor neuron and sensory neuron, and this axon is covered by myelin sheath, which is white in color. So briefly, you can look at the function of spinal cord. Role of spinal cord. Role of spinal cord. Now, sometimes you will act or you respond to stimuli without thinking. I'll again use, you are touching a hot object accidentally. You are not going to think that should I remove my hand or not. That's not possible. You'll do it very fast. So that type of reaction or response takes place in the spinal cord. There is no thinking, where there is no thought. So the spinal cord is involved in, is the site for rapid responses. Site for rapid responses that occur on surface of the body without thought. Without thought. You don't have to think. Something is burning you. You cannot think that should I remove my hand or not. It's going to destroy your body. So rapid responses usually takes place in the spinal cord. This one is important so that it removes the body from danger. The body from danger. Otherwise, either if it is a hot object, it will burn your body. If it is a sharp object, it will continually destroy your body. And then again, it forms the site for transmission of both motor and sensory responses. Site for transmits transmission of sensory and motor responses. We have seen those kind of responses, rapid responses, without thinking. You will feel pain later after removing. You have felt pain, you have removed, but if you wanted to cry, you will cry later. The tears will come later after you have successfully removed your body from danger. So those are sensory and motor responses. So those are the two main types or the roles of the spinal cord. So we can have a small question as we finish. The list. So question, the list below shows functions of the brain. We have a list of memory, thinking, imagination, language, temperature control, vision, hand, eye control, or coordination. Decision making, breathing rate, swallowing, vomiting, emotions, digestion. So from this list, assign the functions to the parts of the brain below. We have cerebrum, we have cerebellum, and medulla. I think it has been very clear the functions of each part of the brain. So at your own time, try to fill this table. You just pick a function here and then you assign it to the correct part of the brain that you think can perform that function. I hope you have enjoyed the lesson. For any responses, there's always a telephone number or an email. Thank you.